Welcome back to the farm for another project. It's your first time. I hope you enjoy. So we're going to be working on today is actually a friend of mine has ordered a epoxy pour, but down in the epoxy we're going to be adding some brass, and then we're also going to be adding a tattered American flag that kind of has black and white burning on the top of it. And we're going to actually inset that flag down into the epoxy with the brass underneath it to really kind of give it some cool dimension, and hopefully it all works out. You know, sometimes what you plan in your head doesn't work out when you try to put it together. So let's head inside the shop and let's get started. All right, so here's the maple we're going to be using for this project. We have a 1.5 inch slab, and then we have this just shy of 1/2 inch spalted maple. So this is what we're actually going to be carving down into and making the pocket for the epoxy pour, which is also going to kind of double as our form, because I'm only going to cut this down within about 1/2 inch from the edges, so I don't have to worry about any kind of epoxy leaking out. Everything will stay in the wood. This is what we're going to make the tattered flag out of, and to really kind of give it some cool character, we're actually going to burn the entire thing, and then as we come back and carve the stripes and the stars, the contrast colors between the burn and the maple is really going to make it pop, which is going to be awesome. And then we're also going to come back and engrave a quote and epoxy fill that with red epoxy, which again, the red with the light of the maple and the black of the burn, I think it's just going to look incredible. Now what we're going to do here, so I don't have to pour an inch thick epoxy through this entire thing, once I cut the flag down, we're going to end up putting brass all around the outside of the flag. So what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm going to leave a piece right here in the center. This is just so hopefully it'll help explain what I want here. So I don't have to fill this entire thing with epoxy. This is essentially going to simulate the area. The epoxy will just be out here. So that way when I put the flag in, the flag will be able to get glued down and save me this entire amount of epoxy. So we'll have all the brass here all around the whole border of it, and the flag is still going to overhang almost an inch all the way around this. So it's actually going to look like all the brass is full underneath it without having to waste so much space of epoxy, because epoxy is not cheap. Now hopefully this works. Hopefully I don't get too much movement with the maple. Maple is known for kind of moving a little bit, so hopefully as I burn it and engrave it, everything works out. But let's get this thing level first and let's get started. Okay, now that we're nice and level, and man, look at some of the beautiful character in this maple. This is going to be awesome. I don't know if you can see right here, but there's a little tiny bit. What I did is I took my 1/4 inch bit and I used a remote and I just dropped it down just about 1/8 of an inch and gave myself a little pocket. So now I know exactly where center is on this board, because once I cut the epoxy carving part of this out, I'm going to have to take it off the machine to pour the epoxy, because it has to be in a climate controlled room. Right now in my shop it's about 41 degrees, so the epoxy is not going to set in here. So it's going to go on and off this machine multiple times. So to make sure this is going to come back at least left to right and top to bottom, now I know where center is at, and then I'm actually going to go ahead and the blanks that I have here on both sides, I'm actually going to go ahead and screw those into the board as well, so that way I know that this will slide right back in, so that way this axis is straight, and then I know right where I'm going to come back, so I can make sure that I can drop my bit back in, because if you're going back and carving on this, like I will be 3 or 4 times on and off the machine, I have to make sure it's perfect. So now we're going to go ahead and carve out, like I said, we're going to carve out the big portion here, which is where we're going to drop all the brass and do the first epoxy pour. So let's get it going. All right, so the machine just got done with the pocket, so now you can see what I'll end up doing is all the brass will all be fitted down here. So when I do the flag will sit right on top of it, and like I said, it's going to hang out about 1 inch all the way around this block, so the brass all the way around the board will be able to be seen without having to waste this whole slab worth of epoxy. But now after talking to the customer, the other thing he has changed his mind on is we're actually going to put a black walnut border on this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this over to the table saw. We're actually going to cut this frame off, and then we're going to frame this whole thing with black walnut, which the contrast between the maple and the black walnut is just going to look even more awesome than what I thought it was going to initially. So let's get this thing over there, get it cut, and then let's start pouring epoxy. Okay, so now that we've actually decided to do a black walnut border instead of use raised with the maple, which I think the dark color is going to just look awesome, I'm really hoping this comes together with all these colors we're changing. I think it's going to be really cool. So you can see here I've got the raised panel. So I've got this at just a 1/2 inch, which should be more than enough to cover all the brass. But I'm going to do 2 separate glue ups because I want to make sure that this is super tight since this is going to be my form for the epoxy. So the black walnut on these 2 edges, and then I'll come back after this is nice and hardened, and then we'll go ahead and do the other sides. I got a little tiny bit of an overhang here on purpose so I can trim this so this is perfectly square on both ends. So again, so that way I can really make sure this is nice and tight. But while we're waiting for the glue to dry, we've actually got this piece here, which is going to be our flag. And I tried to keep as much of the spalting character in here as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on the CNC, and I'm going to put my 60-degree V-bit. And all I'm going to do is a really quick outline of where the stars are going to be and where all the stripes are going to be, because we actually want to go through and burn it. So then that way I have my border. So then I can actually go through and I'm going to put tape everywhere I don't want it to get burned, and then we'll go ahead and hit this whole thing with a torch, and then we'll cut the whole thing out, and hopefully by then the glue is all set so we can get the other side done and we can start pouring epoxy. Okay, so you can see I taped off where it's going to be the white stripes. Since the maple is really light colored with the spalting, I was hoping doing that little bit of light burn, putting this tape on there, would leave it so it would stay nice and light. So let's go ahead and try to peel the tape off here, and hopefully we got the results that we were after. Hopefully burning this tape didn't make it too hard to get off, because it looks like it's not going to be easy. Okay, what a chore that was to get all the tape off of there. But now you can see how we have the burnt stripes and the white stripes. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to be getting ready to engrave what we're going to fill with epoxy down here and clear the pockets for the stars as well. Alright, let's get the machine out of the way here and keep our fingers crossed. So you're probably wondering why some of the stars and some of the other things weren't finished. It's because this is supposed to have kind of a tattered look here. So I'm hoping everything's going to kind of come out nice and clean. So that is going to be our nice and tattered flag, which came out awesome. All right, I'm going to get all the tape off the back of this thing and let's do a little bit of finish sanding. Okay, so we're still waiting on the glue to dry on the main part of the form here. I got the black walnut put all the way around, but it's only been in the clamps here for about 30 minutes. So I just want to do a real quick test fit. I haven't sanded or anything yet with our flag to kind of see how things are going to fit. So that flag fits in there perfect, and it gives me just about a 1/16 of an inch over top of that for the epoxy to have a perfect cut. So now you can kind of see down here, I'm going to have all the pockets for all the bullets, and all the brass will be down underneath here, so be able to see all the brass sticking out. And then we're going to pour epoxy, red epoxy, down inside here and inside of all the text. And I think with the black walnut, I got some sapwood with some really dark walnut around the corners. I think all of that's going to turn out pretty good. Now after I get this sanded down, I'm probably going to come back through and just burn these just a little bit more. There's just a little bit light for what I was really looking for. I love the way the stars look, but I have this one stripe here on the top I need to hit and a little bit more detail. So we'll get some sanding done, get a little bit more burning done, and by then this form should be dry. So we're going to go ahead and get all the brass inside of it and get the first epoxy pour done. Alright, so I got the epoxy poured in here, and one thing I ran into, I don't know if you'll be able to see it down inside here, but down inside the little marks that I have here, we got a lot of bleed out. So the red in the epoxy with this spalted maple, for whatever reason, the spalted maple just started soaking up that red and actually making it bleed out. I don't like the way that looks. It's just not super clean. So we're going to try something different. And I think this actually might turn out a little bit cooler. What we're actually going to do is we're going to put this on my laser. And I'm going to cut this down a little bit thinner. But I'm actually going to use my laser to cut the stars all the way through. So you'll actually be able to see all the brass and everything underneath the stars. I think that might give it kind of a cool, little cool extra added feature. So let's get another piece of this cut down, get it shaved down, and get it on the laser. Okay, so here's the first flag we finished up. I just want to kind of show that not every project goes perfect the first time through. So this is made out of spalted maple, which if you know anything about spalting, which that is actually just the wood is starting to rot. It gives it some great color and some great character, but it also makes the wood extremely porous. So as we poured the epoxy down here, it actually started absorbing it into the wood and bleeding out the color into the maple, which I really didn't want because I wanted it to stand proud between the burned lines and the really light color of the maple. So unfortunately this flag was a fail. So I tried to come back and do one on my laser and change how we did it up a little bit here. So this time we actually cut the stars all the way through, which I think is going to give some really cool depth and character because we'll put some of the brass down underneath it so you actually see that through the stars, which I think is going to be really cool. The problem we had is as we tried to put the red in here, it was reacting with the scorch pen that we were using to kind of give the burn marks. So you can see here, it just really kind of got rid of all the red. And some people might kind of like that look, just really not what I'm going for. I wanted to distress, but not so much that it just destroyed the letters. So this one's going to be thrown away as well. So hopefully the third time's a charm. I have another piece of maple right now that I have just kind of resting. I started to hit it with a little bit of heat really quick. But as you can tell by this one, whenever you put heat to a thin piece of wood, it starts to move and curl and go every which direction. So I really want to try to do a little bit slower. So I'm doing one light at a time and then putting it down on the cold concrete with some weight on top of it to hopefully keep it nice and flat. I only have one piece of this maple left, so I'm hoping, keeping my fingers crossed, that the third time's a charm. So we're just about ready for the epoxy pour. So yesterday I went through and pre-filled all this brass with epoxy. So it kind of fills out. So I'm hoping that none of them are going to float, and hopefully that'll help reduce a lot of the air bubbles. Now, if you're curious about that little cutout piece there, this is a flag that was going to go in it, but it's going to kind of give us the idea we're looking for. But you can see here, this piece actually broke out when I was actually working, popping the stars out of it. So I have another one on the laser right now. But this is what the finished product is essentially going to look like. So when we put this here, I cut that pocket. So as you can look through the stars, now you can actually see the brass through the cutouts. I'm really hoping that's going to kind of give this thing a lot of depth. And then this raised piece here is where I'm going to make sure I have a lot of good wood glue on it, so I have a really good surface to make sure that that flag is right where I want it before I do the last flood epoxy pour. I don't want this wood to shift anywhere. I want it to stay in place. So hopefully that laser will get done, but we're going to go ahead and get the epoxy poured on this. And like I said, we're going to go just above the brass, let that sit for 24 hours, and then we're going to go ahead and continue on with this flag, and then we'll get the deep last epoxy pour on it and finish this project up. I just got done mixing up the epoxy here. I'm just letting it sit for just a minute before we do the first pour. Now the initial pour, we're just going to go level with this piece of wood, so just over the top of the brass. So that way that'll get a chance to kind of remove all the air bubbles, make sure it's perfect. And then we'll actually take the flag and we're going to put that over top of it. And I'm actually going to put super glue along this. We'll put some weight on it to make sure that the flag is going to stay put so it doesn't try to float when we pour the last bit of epoxy. So let's get this thing going. And there we are. We got black walnut oil all sealed on it. We gave one quick polishing here to make sure everything's all nice and clear. And everything just came out awesome. Really happy with this project. I love how you can actually look through the stars and see the brass done underneath it. I think that kind of gives it some real good depth and some real cool character. And then that black walnut just really ties everything around the border. Well, thanks for joining me for another video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up. Feel free to share. If you have any questions or comments, please put those down below. I'll do what I can to answer them for you. If you really enjoyed this project, you want to join me for all my other adventures, all my other projects, consider hitting that subscribe button. Again, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you around.